Hey guys, today I'm going to show you kind of a beginner's guide to making quests for Majesty. So the first thing you'll want to do is, once you've opted into the beta, navigate to your Majesty folder, your Majesty HD folder. Find the SDK tab here. And then to start off, you'll want to use the Rgs Editor. Double click that. So I'm just going to go through kind of the very basics of how to use the editor and then how to actually create GPL functions and just do some really simple things. So this is not going to have a bunch of advanced things on it, but hopefully this is going to be, a good starting point for you to kind of learn how to make quests. So the first thing you want to do is click File, New Quests, and then it's going to ask you for a GPL function name. So this is the name that the quest is going to call to actually execute when you start it up. So we're just going to name it My New Quest Test. So you can name it whatever you want here. It'll ask you for your data set. So I'm going to choose expansion 1, board size, and these are things you can edit later. So I'm going to go ahead and use 256 by 256. That's okay. All right, so the first thing I like to do is go through the regions pattern. So this is actually the landscape that you'll see when the map is loaded. So the first thing you want to do is click Edit Region Patches, and you click New, and let's see. So the first one I'm going to do is I'll do Snow. You can name it whatever you want, and then you've got 3 different settings here. The first one is the terrain. So this is the actual terrain that you'll see. Snow. You can do scorched, plains, grass, forest, swamp. Whatever you want here. So I'm just going to pick snow, and then the fractal settings, this is kind of like, do you want hills, do you want it to be flat or whatnot, so to flat. Then landscape, so this is kind of like what landscape items you might see on the actual terrain. So this, little rocks or various little things, and so these are a lot of like quest specific things, have different little objects on them. So we'll pick Vale Snow, so the Valley of the Serpents. There. And we'll go ahead and make one. We'll do a grass one as well. And we'll just go down here. Do plains dirt. We'll do mountainous. And let's see. We'll do forsaken grass. So I'm just kind of picking whatever, but you can, obviously there's so many options here to really customize it for what you like. So after you've got some region patches created, you click New on the pattern, name this whatever you want here, and then you go ahead and add in your various region patches that you want, and you can set what percentage of the map you would like, and you can just move these dials to whatever you want. So I'm just going to kind of do randomly here. So this is 61% grass, 39% of that snow patch. And over here on the right side is the number of seeds. This is how many different sections you want for each of these patches. So if you have it to the left here, that means it's all going to be one interconnected string for this patch. So the more seeds you do, the more different clumps, kind of like islands of this patch, will be seen. So we'll maybe do one big thing for grass, and the snow will be kind of clumpy, different spots of it. So that's the regions pattern editor there. Okay. So the next thing you'll want to do is the unit patterns. So these are the actual placement of the starting units and buildings, and you get to kind of define a unit pattern, and then later you'll get to actually assign where those are. So the first thing you want to do, I like to start off with the player 1 kingdom. You can again name these whatever you want. I usually, you want to make it kind of descriptive so you know what it is, of course. That, and then here is the layout. So this is the really it's the spacing between the items that you put into this grid here. So the lower numbers mean closer together, and then the higher numbers mean more spaced out. Default is 5. I usually like to keep it at the default. It's usually pretty good spacing there. So now you just go ahead and add in your units. So you've got different categories here. You got your temples, guilds, buildings, unique, so like monsters, some of the named monsters here, the boss monsters, common, so these are just your common monsters. And of course you got heroes, henchmen, and everything else. So, you know, first thing for player 1, you want to put it in a palace typically. You know, you got your palace level 1, 2, or 3. You can do an outpost. You can do really whatever you want. We'll give starting with a palace 3. So this is in this grid here. It's just kind of how you align where you want it to be. So you see when the name here starts with a number. So starting from 0 up until however many units you add, this number will increase by 1. And so this is how you mark where you want to start. So if you put it in multiple places, this means it's a random chance of it being in any one of these places to start. So then let's go ahead and add in let's do a Rangers Guild. And we'll do here and here. So basically it has a 50% chance of starting in this spot or this spot. And then we'll also do another building. Let's see. And you can add in, you know, of course, the monster layers and stuff. If we want to have a goblin fortress, we can do that. We'll have it just in this section. Now keep in mind the way Majesty generates maps, things can get shifted 90 degrees, 180 degrees from whatever the position you have here is. So, you know, wherever these are, it's going to be the same relation to each other, but it will be shifted, you know, whatever degrees the map is. And also there is some RNG, like it's not necessarily going to be exactly diagonal to whatever other buildings are. It does shift them a few tiles here and there, so it's not going to be exact, but it's usually, yeah, it can be fairly close to whatever you put here. So let's go ahead and add in hero. We'll do a healer. We'll just have her up there. All right, so this is our first unit pattern here, and so you can see it's called Player 1 Kingdom. These are the units and buildings that are in it, and then we can add a new unit pattern. So let's do like Monster Layers 1 is what we'll call that. And this one we'll add in some, let's see, we'll do an Ancient Castle. We'll do, what else? Again, you can pick anything that currently exists. You can also add in your custom buildings and units, but that's more of an advanced thing, so I won't include that in this video, but it is possible to add in your own custom creations. So we'll do a rat's nest as well. Rat's nest will have it be a little bit of a random chance of where it lands. Okay, so we have the 2 layers there. Let's go ahead and add in, let's see here. Let's put in a Minotaur. We'll just have him right in the middle there. Okay. So you've got our 2 different patterns. We'll go ahead and make one more. Let's call this Trading Post. And this is just going to be we'll do a guardhouse. We'll do a level 2 guardhouse. We'll have the guardhouse be somewhere on the outer edge, and then we'll have a trading post kind of in the middle. Trading post there, and we'll say trading post can be just somewhere kind of in the middle of it. So in some relation to that. Okay, so we've got several different unit patterns here. And then we've got the next thing to do is the force pattern. So this is how you actually decide where those unit patterns that you created show up on the map. And you can add multiple instances of the same unit pattern. So the first thing you'll want to do is create the new force pattern. So I usually just name this whatever the quest is. So we'll just call my new quest force pattern. Again, you can name it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so there's several different options here. Some of the stuff at the bottom here you really don't need to worry about. It really doesn't affect anything, especially if you're just making quests. So we'll just kind of ignore this part here. All right, so the first thing you'll want to do is go ahead and add in the unit patterns you want. So start with the Player 1 Kingdom. So now this is the world map overall. This is the grid here. So where you want it to start. So if you say Player 1 Kingdom, I want to have this start in this corner. Again, keep in mind the map could rotate, but it's always going to be relative to wherever you lay out all of the buildings. So let's say it can spawn in any one of these corners here. We're good with that. Okay, and so now we're going to add in another unit pattern. Now we could add in another instance of this, for example, but we'll do a trading post, and let's say the trading post, we always want it to be, actually we'll give it a couple different spots. So 4 different spots here. So 4 different spots for our player 1 kingdom and 4 different spots for the trading post. Now, it could be that the player kingdom's here and the trading post is here, or here and here. You know, it really just depends. If you put it in multiple spots, it's going to be randomly choose one spot to show up in. Okay. And then let's go ahead and make actually a second trading post, and we'll have it in each of these different corners there. So again, we've got, so it's going to be the same units, but it's in 2 different spots. Okay, since we have 2 instances, there'll be 2 different spots. And now we'll add in some monster layers. We'll put it right here. So this, if we only put it in here, this means it's guaranteed to spawn right there in relation to the map. And of course, again, rotating the map, it could be 90 degrees, 180 degrees, whatever, from this starting spot, or it could be exactly as it looks here. Okay, we'll add in one more. Let's add in a couple more instances of the monster layers. We'll do one there, and then we'll do one that can be in multiple spots. Now you can put it on top of each other. So when you do that on top of another unit, it's going to have a little asterisk here, and then if you hover over it, it'll tell you which ones are there. So that means, you know, there's a percentage chance that it'll be one of the unit patterns lands there versus the other one. You won't have them both there. They won't both appear there. It's going to be one or the other. But this just gives you some variety on where you place it. Keep in mind, a lot of the generation is very random. You know, the layout's not always going to look exactly the same each time. So just keep that in mind when you're building maps. So if you wanted to go back and edit the unit pattern differences from definitions, you can click this button, and it just takes you back into this setting up if you want to add more or whatever. So that's what that button does. Now, layer data. This is where you can actually change what layers are spawning. So if you click, you know, on the Goblin Fortress, for example, if we click this button here, you can override what it spawns, and you know some of the other layer data, like the max HP, is spawn rate. You can even edit the monster that comes out when the layer is destroyed as well. So that's what this option here does. So if we want to say, you know, let's say there's Goblin Archer, Goblin Champion, and, you know, just for fun, let's say Paladin. You can put in even heroes here. You can say, you know, the weights. You can either drag like this, or you can just click and it goes up by the same amount, especially if you wanted to get like even percent chances, you'd do that. So right here it says 40% chance to spawn a Goblin Archer, 40% Gnome Champion. Oh, I meant to be a Goblin Champion there. And then 20% chance for a Paladin. So just for, you know, for fun, we can edit that. You know, you can, of course, go to these other layers. So if you don't do anything, they're just going to spawn with their default values. Each layer has a default, like, monster that it'll spawn with. Okay. So we'll maybe edit for, and so, again, it's each unit pattern that you place has its own specific thing. So if I edit the Ancient Castle for this one, it's not going to be the same as the Ancient Castle for this one. It's all different. So just keep that in mind as well. So maybe we'll change the Ancient Castle, just one of them. And we'll say we want Black Phantoms to come out of this one. And the special spawn, let's say we want an Ice Dragon. So that means when the layer is destroyed, the Ice Dragon will pop out. Okay. All right, so those are a little bit of the changes, just kind of giving you a preview of what you can do with these buttons here. All right, so that's the layout of our map. So you click OK. And now the map should actually pop up. Now, one of the bugs I get sometimes is the snow pattern, or some of my patterns default back to the grass. So sometimes you have to go back to your regions pattern and edit the region patches. And if you look at the snow one, it actually went back to being basically the very first choices instead of what I chose. So sometimes you got to go back and edit this again just to make it the correct selection. So I'll change it back to a snow. Click OK, and then now it should update. Okay, So now you can kind of get a preview of the map, and this kind of just shows in relation to how, you know, you place the objects. This is kind of the relation it'll be. Now, each time you generate the map, you know, if you go back to unit patterns and do that, it's going to regenerate a map, so it's going to do a new one. So you just kind of get a feel for where things will spawn and kind of just how it looks overall. All right, so now we did all these here, and next is player data. So this is where you actually assign each of those unit patterns to which players. So by default, it only gives you player 1 in the monster player, but you can have up to 7 actual AI kingdoms, basically. So if I want, you know, human player, add in player 1 kingdom. So this shows, you know, the unit force and then who owns it, basically what color it is. So I'll add player 1 kingdom. You can also decide the starting gold. So let's give us 30,000 gold, nice healthy gold amount to start the game. Player 2, so if you wanted to add in, let's say, just for fun, one of the layers is player 2, you can do that there. And then let's say the rest of the layers are going to be the monster kingdom. There. And then there. And then also, you know, player 2, you can name them, and this name doesn't really affect anything, but just for your own sake, you can name them whatever you want. And I forgot to add in our trading posts. We'll add those there as well. Okay. So you can see here all of the different unit patterns that we put down now have an owner in them. Okay. Okay there. All right. So now our quest is basically it's ready to go. So if you didn't want to do any scripting or anything like that, you can actually do a test with this quest if you wanted to. You know, it's not going to have any victory conditions or anything like that, but it is now for the most part done. So one of the things you want to do is click here. So we've been in map view each time, which kind of shows you this here. But you want to go to project view, so under edit, and then right here. So this is the GPL initialization function name. So this is the function that will be called when the quest is first initialized. So this is what your default function is going to be that actually runs this quest. So you want to, my new test quest is what I'm going to call it. And so then you can also set things like the difficulty level, you know, whatever you think it'll be. You can, so this stuff here is what's going to be shown up when the player selects the quest in their menu when they're about to play the quest. So you want to name it, you know, my new test quest. This part here is the quest goals. So this would be like, you know, what the victory condition is. So maybe like destroy all layers. And then here's kind of a longer description. You can get some background information like, you know, the elves and dwarves were at war, blah, 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 whatever you want to put in there, okay? And here's where you'll add in everything you need to load to actually make the quest run. So first thing you'll want to do is add in, well, first let me save this so that we've got a save point. So you navigate to, so typically what I do, and this is just, you know, you can do whatever you want, but I have under SDK folder, I have a folder for each of my different quests. So I've already got one made for this test quest here. So then I just, you know, my new quest test. Save it as a MQ XML file, save there, and then go ahead and add in the quest template. This is the Q file. Okay. So this is what you'll want to do to start off with. All right, so now we can save that. So we're pretty much done with this part for now until we do some of the coding here. So now I'll kind of go into that coding part. So let's go ahead and start with, so I've kind of got a blank template here for how to actually make a GPL function. So this is a very simple one that kind of goes through some of the initial things you'll want to do and have. So the first thing is you'll do is you type function here and then the name of the actual function. So before we edit this one, let me go ahead and save here. So you'll want to make a folder, one for data and then one for GPL. And this just makes organizing things a little bit easier. So under GPL, we're going to name this my new test quest.gpl. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and, so this function name needs to be the exact same as what we have right here. This needs to match that in order for it to run. So we're going to go ahead and name it that. And then we're going to go ahead and, it's going to declare a couple different things. So, so one of the things I would recommend for anyone who's wanting to do quests is to kind of read up on the documentation. So under Majesty SDK documentation folder, this is a very handy 2 files here. One is the how to make a quest. This kind of covers some of the basics of the Rgs Editor. But this GPL reference file really is, I would say, extremely useful in terms of understanding how to write and kind of what each of the things means. So I would recommend reading through this. It goes into different keywords that you can do, different types. So you've got agents, you've got integers, strings, lists, etc. And then it goes into a lot of handy little pre-made functions that you can just call upon that are already in the game that you don't have to build from scratch. For example, list palaces. So it tells you, the name of it, what it does, and then kind of what it returns. There's a bunch of these list objects that you're going to want to use in order to make your quest work. So again, that's going to be in your SDK documentation folder. Especially this one right here, GPL reference, is really handy. Something I definitely recommend you have available while you're making a quest. I reference it all the time, even though I've made so many quests, just to make sure that the parameters inside, for example, that I'm doing it right, or just if I forget how to do a certain thing, this is very handy. Okay. All right. So to start off with, you want to declare any of these variables that are going to be used. So the AI root agent, this is something that is from the base compiler that allows you to execute the entire game. And I don't know, I'm not really saying that exactly in a technical sense of what it does, but this is how to do things like the victory conditions, events, and stuff like that. So you'll want to declare this every time whenever you start up a new quest. You just declare agent, AI root agent, like that. The next thing I like to do, and typically for most quests you're going to do this as well, is find the palace. So for player 1, because player 1's almost always going to have a palace when you're doing a quest. So to do that, you'll declare a list called palaces and an agent called palace. Now you can actually name these whatever you want. You can name it palace, whatever you want to do. It's easier if you just name it these to keep track, just because it's very universal when you're making quests, what you're gonna want to put in. So I wouldn't mess with it too much. Maybe you can even do like palace 1 if you're gonna have player 2's palace, could be maybe palace 2, whatever you want to do. But you want to have some way to reference both the list of all palaces and then the palace for player 1. So when I'm testing, I'll kind of go through each of these little things I've got set up here, and just kind of why I included. These are some of the default things that I include in pretty much every quest. I start with these before I build out anything more. One thing to note, if you're not really a coder or not really used to coding, this GPL language, it's very similar to, I believe, C++. But one of the things you can do is actually add in comments. So if you do 2 slashes like this, what that does means the compiler will ignore anything after that line. So you can just use this to write comments, or just do separators like this up here at the top. So that's what a lot of people will do when they're writing out these functions, is write in these comments here, so you can kind of tell what each thing does, or the reasoning for why you include it. So this here is reveal map for testing purposes. So I like to use this pre-built function, reveal whole map, and then in parentheses you put in the player number. So you can do player 1. This could be also player 2 or 3 if you wanted to reveal it for them, for the AI players. But since it's since we are player 1, the human player, that's why I put that there. And one of the things you also want to keep in mind is each of these lines needs to end with a semicolon unless you're doing an operator. So if you're doing one of the keywords, you don't need to have a semicolon at the end, but otherwise you do need to have that. So just keep in mind a lot of little things like that can cause your code to not run right or not compile. And that's something, you know, if you're not used to coding at all or anything like that, one of the things you'll have to learn. So this right here reveals the whole map for player 1. And so once your quest is ready, you can actually do this right here, comment it out, and then now that this would no longer run if you were to do that. So I'm going to leave it open for now to where it will run. So then in order to set up the victory condition, we call the global container unit. So that's the, so what you'll really just basically copy paste this from each of your quests. So AI root agent equals retrieve agent GPL AI root. So it's just a pre-built function to retrieve the global container unit to actually run all the quests. For each user quest that you make, you'll want to set the quest number to 0. You can identify the quest and reference that in the intents table. I can't remember exactly which table it is, but there's really no reason to. You might as well just set the quest number 0, and then you call this right here. Just next thing you want to do is playing music. So you do pre-built functions to quest music with the argument there, AI root agent. So again, this is a very important thing for setting up a lot of the different quest things to happen. And the next is just getting the player 1 palace. So you'll start with lists. So whatever you call this list here for palaces is equal to the pre-built function list palaces. So it's just an empty argument there. So this basically just pulls in, it makes a list of all the palaces. So if there was player 1, 2, and 3 palaces, you'd have, you know, 3 different palaces, for example. But since in this quest we only have 1 palace, so we're saying palace, and I'll even call this player 1. This palace, we'll call it palace 1, just to make it a little more, make sense a little bit more. So it's going to list the member from this list, from the list of palaces, 1. So this is the first one in there. Since there's only 1 palace, it's always going to have player 1. Typically the way it works though is even if you have multiple palaces, the very first palace is always player 1, just a kind of a handy note, but that's not necessarily always the case for other things. If you're listing like all the layers on a map or all the buildings on a map or something like that, the list, you don't necessarily know which number in that list corresponds to which item. So, but just for palaces, we know that list member underscore palaces 1 is always going to be palace 1. Okay. Next, we set up what are called the quest flags. So you don't have to do this, but if you want to have certain events trigger within your quests, the very easy way to do it is to use what are called the quest flags. You can have up to 20 of them in the default prototype. So what this means is, so these are basically true or false. These are Boolean types. So this quest flag 1 can be either true or false. So we're saying to start off with that each of these are false. And then we're going to do if statements to look those up. And if they're false, we'll run something. And then we can, after we've run whatever we want to do, we can set them to true, and then it won't trigger again. So that's kind of a way you can do a one-time event to occur, is using this right here. And then the next thing I want to do is set up a victory condition. So you don't have to do it in this order. You don't even need to you don't technically have to have a victory condition for the quest to run, but of course if you want there to be a way for them to win, you'll want to include that. So what you'll do is you'll call in the AI root agents victory condition, and then you'll say whatever function it can be, and this can be whatever function you want it to be. So we'll call it test quest 1. And so using the $, that's how you call a specific function. Yeah, I should have mentioned that before. So anywhere you see a $, that means it's calling a certain function, and whatever that function name is will get executed. So now we need to define test quest 1. So we'll go down here and call this right here test quest 1. And so this is going to be what we call to determine whether we've won the game or not, or how we're going to determine whether the players won the game. So this right here is the starting a new thread. This is how victory conditions get called, or how the events get called. This is a time, basically it starts at a stopwatch, and then once it hits this time here, in milliseconds, it runs this function right here. So you start a new thread. So this right here, victory condition needs to match this right here, and then so it says in milliseconds when we're going to call this. Now, for a victory condition, you typically want this to trigger every 2 or 3 seconds, right? So if you're trying to see, you know, have we, for example, killed all the palaces, enemy palaces in the map, you don't want the player waiting 5 minutes after they destroy the palace for it to finally trigger and say, oh, okay, yeah, we check now to see if you've won. You want it to trigger pretty quickly. So one of the things you can bring in, and let me pull up another quest just to, actually I don't have it on that one. So I'll pull up another quest I've made just to kind of show you how quickly you want to do it. So there is a predetermined definition of how quickly to call back to check victory. So it's called the hashtag victory condition underscore callback underscore frequency. So you could set it to like whatever in milliseconds, so 2,000 milliseconds. Be every 2 seconds, or you can have this predefined frequency here, and so it's just kind of easier. It makes it a little bit cleaner for you to do this to say how often you want to check. So this is currently set to about, I believe, 2,000 milliseconds. So every 2 seconds, it'll check to see the victory. So every 2 milliseconds, it'll check this file right here, this function, excuse me. Test quest run, which we've said down here. Now right now we haven't actually done anything. Right now we've just kind of defined some of the, I kind of already done this, some of the parameters here, but right now it's not actually doing anything. So if this quest, we want it to be eliminate all enemies, for example, or let's say destroy all layers on the map. So once all the map is clear of layers, the player 1 wins. Let's say that's our victory condition. Okay, so how do we actually do that? Well, you'll want to start with a list objects. So again, this is where the GPL reference really comes in handy to show you kind of how you do you do this, how you actually make this function. So if you go down here, find list objects, click that, it'll actually tell you exactly what you need to do to fill out this list and kind of how it works. It tells you who you want to do the search origin, the string, each of these things is really well defined here on how to actually do it. So following this guide here, can do a split screen so you can kind of follow along. So list objects. So the first thing you want to do is the agent to use the search origin. So we've already defined an agent palace. So this is, of player 1. So we'll go ahead and use that agent since it's already there and we already have defined it. So Palace is going to do the search. So what are we going to look for? So now it's the string, the unit type to match. So we're going to do layer. It needs to be in those parentheses like that because it's a string type. So next is the search radius in pixels. So typically you're going to want to search the entire map when you're doing something like this to find all the layers no matter where they are in the map. And the next is an existing list that we'll use with the results of search. So this is the list that gets filled with everything it finds. So we need to define a new list here. So we're going to call this enemy layers 1. You can, again, name it whatever you want, but typically you want to be kind of descriptive on that. So we'll call this enemy layers 1, okay? And then there's some optional modifiers. So these are different things you can add in to kind of help filter out the list. So for example, since we're doing layers here, we want to do any enemy layers, so not my player. So what this does is only objects that do not match the supply agent player ID will fill this list. So for example, when we created our player 1 kingdom, we added in a goblin fortress. So if we were doing destroy all enemy layers, we wouldn't want this layer to show up in this list, because otherwise it's going to say, you know, at the end of it, oh, we still got the goblin fortress there, so no, don't declare victory. So we want to say not by player. This means basically anything that's not the agent right here, and palace is player 1, because it's pulling in player 1's palace, okay? You can also do things like check the title of it. You could say like specific layers. For example, if we wanted to only look for, let's say, ancient castle, you could do that to only pull in any layers that are not from my player that are called ancient castle. But for now, we'll just do this. So this should pull in basically every layer that is not player 1's layer. So that's really what we're looking for. And again, you got to make sure you have your semicolons at the end of this. Okay. So we're putting all the layers that are not my player into the list enemy layers 1. Okay, so that's great. So we've got that part. Now, how do we determine whether there are any layers left? Well, that's another function. It's called list size. So this gets the number of elements that are in that list and returns an integer here. So the next thing we'll call is list size of the list. So we'll want to do this list here that we just made. Okay. So to do the easiest way to do this is just do an if statement. So if you do open parentheses list size equals 0. So if there are no layers in this list, you know, if this list is blank, it means we've killed all the enemy layers, what do we want to do? So do a begin and an end here. Well, first we'll want to declare victory. Okay, so in this pre-built function, the agent, we need an agent of the player to declare victory for. So we can again use palace since it's already defined there. Palace 1, okay? So now that means when this function is called, test quest will run every frequency, which is 2 seconds. Okay, so every 2 seconds it's going to run this thing. It's going to check. It's going to build that list. It's going to check. Is that list size 0? If it is, if this is true, it executes this right here. If it's false, it does not. It ignores this right here and just goes, and it keeps going. So if we could have different checks here, we could do, you know, if other things, you could have just have it spawn. You can do whatever you want here. And it would continue running it because it's going to ignore this part right here if this is false. So if it's true, do this inside. Okay. So declare the victory, and then now that we've declared victory, we want to stop checking the victory condition. It's a very important thing that it's very easy to forget. But if the player continues playing after they've won the game, you no longer want them to continue checking this. Otherwise, you don't want the victory condition to continue running. Otherwise, it's going to trigger every 2 seconds. It's going to say, oh, you won the game again. Oh, you won again. And it'll just keep popping up the in-game screen. So you want to do what's called kill thread. And then it's going to be AI root agents victory condition. Okay. So if the size of this list that we built here is 0, declare victory for player 1 and stop checking the victory condition. Okay. So this is a very simple victory condition that we've just built here. So the very first thing we're doing, we're pulling in the global container unit. we're looking at the list of palaces, we're pulling out player 1's palace, then we're building a list of all the layers on the map. So -1 means, again, the entire map to search. Oh, another thing I missed, actually. So we need to add in no hidden map. So if you recall, when you start a game with Majesty, a lot of the map that you don't see is going to be just black. So if we were to run this, despite searching the entire map, it only searches what you can see unless you type in no hidden map. This means no matter where it is, even if it's in the fog of war, the black area that you haven't explored yet, it'll still check it. So I'm glad we caught that. So, and again, that's one of the options right here that you can listen to the GPL references. Very handy to kind of understand what each of these things does. All right, so again, so we look at the entire map, find all the layers that are not my player, no matter where they're at. And if that list size of layers is 0, we want declare victory for player 1 and kill thread. We want to stop checking the victory condition, okay? So we've got the very first thing done, which is the victory condition. So now let's go ahead and make some events to occur during the quest. So this one we'll call, again, you can name this whatever you want. We'll do test quest events. We'll do test quest events 1. And again, this works the same way that the other one works, except we're going to say that how often we want to call this. So this will be called the very first time is what you define here. So let's say, and you can do, there's a couple different functions you can do to make it a little bit more randomized. So if you do random _ time pre-built function, and you say 150,000, so this puts it, I think it's like I can't remember exactly how often this varies it, but it's not going to be exactly at this juncture. So, if you look that up of how often, so you can do just a quick, let's do minutes converter, just to make it easier for you. So every, 150,000 milliseconds is 2.5 minutes. So let's just actually, to make it easier, I won't even include this, just to make it more basic. So what this is saying is, okay, at 2.5 minutes, run this to start off. Okay, so run test quest events 1. Okay, so now it's going to run this right here, and this is where our event flags come into play. So I've already kind of built out the basics of it to kind of just show you how it's going to work. So at 2.5 minutes, at 150,000 milliseconds, run this function right here, test quest events 1, which is right here. Okay. And then the way you can make events happen is using these quest flags. So again, remember we defined up here, the starting out values is false. These are true false flags. And so the very first thing we do is we check. So if our first flag is false, do this inside here. So this would be our first event. So first event, we'll use the function spawn unit. So this is just makes a unit. Okay, so the first thing you'll want to do, and I can even pull it up right here. So these are the things you can, the parameters within spawn unit. So you put the agent doing the spawning, the string, so these are the name of the unit, the coordinate, where you want this to be, and then you can specify, for example, the player number. You can do a couple other things, like if you're doing a building, you can do max HP, which means it's it's completely built. If you don't do max HP, it becomes a foundation. So keep that in mind when you're doing buildings. And there's a couple other things you can do there too. All right, so for spawning units, so let's say, so first is the agent doing the spawning, so this is going to be the palace. This is basically player 1. So if you had, for instance, a guild and you wanted the guild to do it, you could name the agent the guild, or whatever, whatever you want it to be. So we'll do player 1, and then we'll do a cultist. Cultist there. And then now is the location. So these are a new type here, which would be coordinate. So we'll call this location 1. So now we need to, so if we want this to be spawned at location 1, we need to define what that is. So we can do, so let's define it. So one of the pre-built functions is called random chord. All right, and I'll show you here on this side. So again, you can also actually click these to jump to them, so it makes it really handy. So it returns a random coordinates raised around the center point of a unit or a coordinate. So the center point, and then the minimum distance, and then the maximum distance. So the minimum is optional. So if you leave, if you just do, for example, around the palace, 500. If we do that, that means anywhere between exactly at the palace to 500 pixels away. That's the distance that it could possibly spawn in, and it could be any direction. So keep in mind there is some RNG to it. It's not always going to be the exact same spot each time. But you can also do a minimum distance, 200, and let's say 1500. So this means with anywhere within 200 to 1500 distance away from whatever agent you're having be the center point, this it'll spawn in that location. Okay, and then next, okay, so we got the palace. So agent doing the spawning palace, what we're spawning, cultist, where we want to spawn it, coordinate, location 1, and we're going to call it player 1. So we want this to be on player 1's team. Okay, so this will spawn a cultist. There are other modifiers you can do. You can adjust attributes and things to it, but for this purposes, we're just going to do a very simple, just spawning that unit. And next, we'll just spawn one more thing. So we'll do again the palace spawning it. We'll do a healer, or let's do a warrior. And this time, let's just do random. Let's go, 500, 100. So you can also just, so you can either do a coordinate here and then define it and then have it just reference that defined coordinate, or you can actually just say within the argument itself the actual coordinate defined like that. So multiple ways you can do it. Okay, and this one, let's do player 2. So this will be reds for red. We'll have that warrior. So they're going to be the one that owns this basically. Okay. All right, so at 2.5 minutes, we're going to call this function to start off with. Okay, and then this function is going to check here. Is the quest flag 1 false? And since it starts out false, it's going to be yes. So it's going to go through and run through this, and then what it's going to do is set the quest flag to true. So that means the quest flag is no longer false. So then when it runs it again, it's going to say, is quest flag 1 false? No, it's not. It is not false. So it's going to skip it. This is how you do events tab just one time. Okay, that's kind of the basis of how that's going to work. All right, and then so we've got, it's going to spawn these 2 units, and then we need to set the thread. So this basically just says, when do we want this thread, this victory condition 2, to trigger again? So after the 2.5 minutes is up, it triggers this, and then what time after that do you want the next event to occur? So we're going to say, so right now 300,000, that's going to be 5 minutes basically. So then within 5 minutes, it's going to trigger the next one if the if condition is satisfied. So again, this next one is asking for quest flag 2, and that's false. So it's going to start out false. So the very first time it runs through this, it's going to, since we've got if or else if, so this means basically only one of these can be, once it finds the first one, it's going to not go through the other ones. Once the first one is satisfied, it just ignores the other ones. So the first time it runs it through, it's going to start here, going to go through here, boom. I check this condition. The first time it's false, so it is true. So this is satisfied. So then it goes through and runs this, and then it does not run this the very first time it runs through. And then we're setting the condition to trigger 5 minutes later. So then the next time it comes through, this quest flag has been set to true. So then it comes through and it says, Is this quest flag 1 false? No, it's not false. So it ignores this part. Then it goes here. Is quest flag 2 false? If quest flag 2 is false, then it does this. So that's how you do your next event. And then quest flag 3 would be after that. So you can have up to 20 different quest flags in the base prototype. You can add more to that, but typically 20 is going to be more than enough for the amount of events you're making for most quests. Okay. All right, so our next one, let's see. Trying to think of what we can do here. I mean, you can really spawn units. You can, whatever you wanted to do that, modifies the event. I'll tell you what, we can actually do a really interesting one to raise the level of our cultists to make them a little bit stronger. So the first thing what I want to do is do a list objects. So who's doing the list palace? That's going to be player 1 looking. So we're going to find heroes, search the entire map. We're going to put them in the list hero list. So now, so we said this defined it here, we need to define it up here. Okay. So I want to find cultists that are on my player. Okay. So player 1. Nothing inside other units. I need to spell that right. So what this does is, if the cultist, for example, was in a building, then this would still find it. So there could be times if you don't include that and you're building a list of, for example, heroes, and a hero's in a building, it wouldn't get picked up because he wouldn't be visible outside. So just keep that in mind. And since I'm looking for players that are on my player, I don't need to do no hidden map, because when my players are exploring, they're always visible to me because they're under my line of sight. So I don't need to include that. And I can also do, for example, check titles cultist. So what this means is, it's looking at the list of heroes, and it's saying it needs to be my player. It needs to be, even if it's inside of a building, check the titles and find the ones that say cultists. So if you had multiple cultists, if you had like 4 or 5 cultists, it's going to pull in all 4 or 5 of them. Okay. So next we want to do list member 1. So let's just say, we're going to grab the first one it finds. So if there's 5 of them, it's just going to pick one, and we don't know how it's going to pick that one. It could be this one that we spawned here. It could be one that the player recruited on their own, or one that from somewhere else. Okay. So for this first cultist, we want to do some modifications. Let's make his HP a little bit higher. So in order to adjust him, we need to create a new agent. So we'll call this Cult Boy. Okay. So we want to define what Cult Boy is. So Cult Boy is list member from this list 1. So it's the first cultist from this list we're calling Cult Boy. And you can name this whatever you wanted to name it for this agent. Okay, so that's what that Cult Boy is. So now we want to adjust attribute of what Cult Boy. So there's this really handy function that you do here. You do pound ATTRIB, and what this does is when the global container unit sees that, it automatically strips this away, and then it just checks what this attribute is. Okay, so max HP, so it's the maximum HP they can have, and then it's what you want to set it to. So if you are adjusting it, you can adjust it up or down. So if you do a negative number, -10, that means you decrease it by 10. If you do a positive number, increases it by 10. So let's just say 100, for example. So now their max HP for this one guy here is getting up to 100. And then let's say we want to give him a new spell. Learn spell, pre-built function here, Cult Boy. Then now you do the spell name. So let's give him the paladin spell Shield of Light. Okay, so you might have to look up what a lot of these spells are to find the exact spell name. You can do this under the characters. In fact, I'll pull it up real quick. So you go under SDK, under the original quest. Here's where all that data lives. Under MX characters, for example, you've got all the different, so this is the adept one, it's all the different attributes they have, what their values are. This is kind of a way you can see, and it also shows you any spells that they have. So if we find, let's do a Control F Paladin. So you can see this is their first spell, Shield of Light. So it needs to match that exactly, including the underscores in there. Okay. So he's going to learn, we're adjusting his health. And actually, when you're doing health, this only puts his max HP. If we also want him to have his current HP, you would just do HP. Otherwise, he'd be injured if you just increase his max HP, but don't increase his normal HP. He hasn't gained it until he regens up to it. So this just makes it faster to where he gains both max HP and current HP. All right, so he's going to increase his HP by 100 and then learn a new spell. Keep in mind, some of the spells have level requirements. For example, Shield of Light, I believe, is level 4. So if he's not level 4, he'll have the spell. He'll have the spell in his queue, basically, until he hits level 4. Then he'll learn the spell, if that was the case. Okay. So that's our next flag, and then we're going to have it set to, again, the quest flag true. So after it runs this here, we'll set the quest flag to as true, and we'll have to set the flag, the threat interval to 120,000 milliseconds. So again, so the very first time it comes through, when you first start the game, it's going to run through this one first, and the second time, since this one will be true, it'll skip this one, go here, run through this one, and then it'll set this to true, and then the third time it runs through, it'll come here. Okay. Now, one of the ways you can have a recurring event, like if this is the last event and you just want it to constantly happen every X seconds or X minutes, whatever it may be, is you don't set this flag to true. If you leave this one as false, whenever it runs this at the very end, it's always going to run this one because it's always false. So setting it to true makes it a one-time event. Setting it, if you don't set anything, it's just recurring, basically. So very last thing, we'll just do, let's say spawn units. Let's spawn a dragon. Another pre-built function is called closest map edge of an agent, which we'll say palace. So this means basically wherever your palace is on the map, the closest map edge is where it's going to spawn in. And then let's do monster player. So this would be the yellow monsters would gain this unit. Okay. So that's going to be our last one. And then we're going to have it trigger, yeah, that's fine, 300,000. So it's about 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes, actually let's do 150. So this will be every 2.5 minutes. So every 2.5 minutes, because we haven't set the flag to true, it's going to continually spawn this dragon. Now there's a bunch of other more advanced things you can do, but I just want to give kind of a very basic overview of how to build a quest. So now this quest is pretty much ready to go. We've got a victory condition that we set down here. We've got some events here, and then the rest of it's already set up. So we can save this here. So now we need to add it in from our Rgs Editor. So pull this back up right here. So I guess I need to mention one of the other things is you need to compile your function. So basically get the code ready to be executed. So you'll want to pull in these two things. So this first one here is going to be it's a batch file that actually makes the GPL file. So what this does is you'll edit two things. This right here, the output name for the BCD file, and then also the path. So this just tells you what files to pull into your BCD file. So I've got those already named there, so we need to make sure our path, so we don't actually have a path yet. So let me pull in, got a pre-built one so you can kind of show you what this does here. So we'll call this my new test quest path. Okay. So first you want to define your source. So this is going to be our GPL file. So that is my new test quest.gpl. And if you had other things like data files or other GPL files, you would include those here. But since we only have the one, that's all we're going to need to include. So just because it's a very simple quest that we made. Okay, and now we want to make GPL. Now you can make the GPL here, or you can have the Rgs Editor make the GPL. Make the BCD file. It's a little bit easier if we just do this. So when you double click it, it's going to execute, and then if there's an issue, it's hard to see here. So it didn't compile correctly because we've got an error somewhere. So this happens a lot. Might be some little thing that you need to fix here. So we'll get back to that in a second. Let's see if I can find where it might be. I don't see it. Okay. So just to make it a little easier, I'm going to go ahead and pull the BCD file from another one, put it in here, and then see if I can, because the Rgs Editor, you can actually see what the issue is with it when you try to compile it. So we're going to name this to my new quest test.bcd file. Okay, so what you do here is under the bytecode, pull in your BCD file, and you add a source to it. So this will be your GPL file. So all the sources, GPL files, point to your BCD file. Then you do a right click, compile all. Okay, so it did work. Okay. So for some reason it just wasn't working when I was double clicking it. But so this is what it does. So it'll run through it, and if it's correct, it'll say done writing file, and you click, you can save it now. So now this quest is ready to go. So this is ready to be uploaded to Steam. So you do a file, Steam Workshop upload. Let's see here. Should be ready to go here. Oh, I guess I'm not connected to Steam. That's why. So you need to be on Steam to actually click that and logged in. But basically you would go through that process. It's a very simple process. It walks you through it to actually upload the file, and then it's ready to go. So yeah, I know this is very rambling, and I'm not going to edit it or anything. This is my first time trying a video like this. So hopefully this was at least kind of helpful for you to kind of see what it takes to actually make a quest. This is a very simple quest, not a whole lot of things going on, and not very many advanced things, but just to kind of show you, it's really not as daunting as it seems. I highly recommend looking through this GPL reference guide, and also under the documentation, also going through how to make a quest, because this has some very good information, kind of defines a lot of these things a little bit better than some of the terms I was using especially. So yeah, this is a very handy function as well, or handy reference guide. So hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of what to do. Sorry for how unprofessional this was. I'm just trying to kind of do it on the fly here, but hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll see some of you guys starting to make some more quests for Majesty. All right, thanks.